Thank you so much for having me and inviting me here today. My name is Mnar Muhawesh. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of MintPress News. But my journey into journalism started when I was 9 years old, when both of my parents decided to pack our bags and move us back home to where they had come from Palestine. You see, both of my parents are very obsessed with talking about their adat and taqalid. If you know Arabic, that means their traditions and their culture as Palestinians. And so we packed our bags and moved to Palestine. And it was an extremely, extremely eye-opening experience. I grew up, born and raised in Minnesota, in a pristine suburb where everything was very calm and green. When we arrived in Palestine, the first thing I noticed was just how crystal clear the skies were. The pigeons were flying everywhere, cats were roaming the street. But it was really, really, really hard not to notice that we had just moved into a police state under Israeli apartheid. Every turn we took in the streets of Palestine, there were Israeli soldiers loading their guns, pointing them at civilians. The people of Palestine were living in utmost fear. When I was there, I had moved there when I was 9 years old, and things were, despite very obviously moving into an apartheid and police state, things were somewhat calm. But by the time I was 11 years old, the second intifada had broken out at Masjid al-Aqsa. And there I was, trying to get to school as an 11-year-old girl. And even though I had already lived there for 2 years, I still had the comforts of being there as an American. Because we were American, because we were, spoke mostly English, we were treated with somewhat of a privilege because we held that American passport. But there we were, trying to go to school, me and my siblings. I was about in the 6th and 7th grade now. And every day I would try to go to school, and on my way I would witness homes being demolished by Israeli soldiers. As we entered school, I'd look around my classroom, and there would be maybe less than 10 students in our class each day. The seats were completely empty. And we'd ask, where is this person? Where is this person? Maybe throughout the week, they would come back, and they would tell us how they were stopped at checkpoints, and how they weren't able to cross through, or maybe that someone in their family had been shot, had been killed, they had to attend the funeral. But for an 11-year-old child, especially someone who had lived in America and had come, this was a very eye-opening experience. I felt extremely, extremely helpless. When we would pass through checkpoints to visit family members, I, as an 11-year-old girl, would witness people getting shot at. Little kids getting stopped at a checkpoint and basically being denied an education and told to turn home. I will never forget the day when I stood there at the checkpoint, trying to get past, being caged as if we were animals, and seeing little children, literally the age of maybe 7, 8 years old, holding their backpacks, and they were throwing rocks at the soldiers because the soldiers would not allow them to get through, to get to school. We'd be sitting in our taxis, in our cabs, in our vans to get through checkpoints at times, and the taxi driver would yell at us to duck because soldiers would be shooting at little kids, rubber bullets. I saw women at the checkpoints trying to get through, their children trying to bring through their husbands, the elderly, to get to So, one of the most sad moments of crossing through checkpoints was not the fact that we were almost shot at by Israeli soldiers, but watching elderly stand at checkpoints trying to get through, with permits, by the way, to get through to the hospital for care. But Israeli soldiers would deny them, and they would be turned back. And this was an extremely, extremely eye-opening experience for a young American preteen. My parents had enough. we were pretty Americanized, and they decided, we want to raise our kids in a better environment. I got to learn Arabic, I got to learn about our Palestinian roots, but now it was time to go back home to Minnesota. My home, I guess. So when we arrived back in the United States, the first thing I noticed was just how calm and green everything was in Minnesota. My mind, though, was racing at 1,000,000 miles per hour. My mind, all it could think about were those little children trying to cross through the checkpoints. All I could think about were those people trying to cross through, the kids in my class. Did they make it that day for school? My mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles per hour because I remember sitting on my rooftop. I don't know how my parents allowed us to do this, but we would watch Israeli planes rain down bombs and airstrikes on Ramallah. You could say I was troubled mentally. I had suffered from PTSD and anxiety at the time. I remember entering my 8th grade classroom and talking to the kids. They would ask me, where are you from? And I would try to say Palestine, and tears would just start falling down my eyes. And actually, in the past 2 years, for the first time, I haven't cried while giving this presentation. The memories and the horrific memories of war that I had lived through, that people in Palestine lived through every single day, haunted me every single moment of my day. And I would try to explain and express these things to the kids in my classroom, but of course, this was 8th grade in suburban Minnesota, where kids, all they cared about was sex, drugs, partying it up. So when I talked about Palestine and the horrific things that I had seen, water being cut off, bombs being rained down, kids my age that weren't able to go to school, they had no idea. They could not even begin to relate to the stories that I had shared with them. It was like I was speaking a completely different language. I would say I'm from Palestine, they'd say, oh, Pakistan. They had no idea what the difference was. And so there I was, as about 12, 13 years old, thinking how helpless and alone I had felt in that classroom. And I did what most people do. They turned to the media to get information about what was going on around the world. And so there I was, while kids in my class were caring about partying and whatever it is that they were doing, I turned to the media to look for information and updates on what was going on back home in Palestine. And to my great surprise, I was shocked, and I was very much let down. The images that I had seen coming out of Palestine were children, armed, women covered up, men, they always only showed dark men bearing arms, chanting slogans against Israel. Then when it came to Israel, they would show images of, democracy and the women at the beaches wearing bikinis and kids at nightclubs, like they're free, they're living in a democracy. But look at these barbaric and uncivilized Palestinians. They never showed the images of the children that I had seen that were sitting in my classroom. They had never shown the images of the mothers trying to go and cross the checkpoints and to take their children to school, take their husbands to the hospital. They had never shown the images of the children being shot at with these rubber bullets for being denied an education, something that if most Americans would see, you better believe that they would be caring about what was going on in Palestine. I was shocked, and I was extremely let down. But at that age, even though I was there alone in my classroom, I thought, especially with my Palestinian heritage and resistance in my blood, I thought, there's no way I'm going to allow this to continue. I pointed to the media and said, because of the media propaganda and imagery that they were showing about Palestine, that's the only reason the United States continues to support apartheid and colonialism in Israel. And so at that very young age, at 12, 13 years old, I decided that I was going to become a journalist and to speak for Palestinians and all people affected by war. Because the people of war have always had, the victims of war have always had their voice silenced. And so that became my passion. That became all I would talk about. And I took that sadness, that deep feeling of helplessness that I had, and I turned it into my strength, despite how alone I felt at that young age. And so I continued to pursue journalism, took political classes and so forth. At the age of 18, something really interesting happened. or actually I want to go back right after I had moved back and decided to become a journalist. A couple of months after I had made this decision, 9/11 happened. And I'm sure many of you sitting in this room can relate to that very day 9/11 took place. And I sat in my, I believe I was in 9th grade at this time. I sat in my classroom that day when the Twin Towers had hit. And the kids in the classroom turned to me and they said, "Your people did this. Your people did this." And I had already felt extremely isolated and alone as a Palestinian in this very white suburban junior high. But now I had felt like nobody understood what I was going through and what was going on in my mind. And I believe it was the same week, MSNBC played a very disturbing image coming out of Gaza. They played a video of Palestinians passing out candy in Gaza, and they had presented it as, "Look, Palestinians are celebrating 9/11. When in reality, that video was of Palestinians celebrating AIDS from a year before. They had planted this video as a propaganda video to basically raise this kind of hatred towards Muslims. But I noticed that there was this very interesting way that Palestinians specifically were portrayed in the media. And of course, this whole image, all of these images that were being perpetrated from Palestine were pushing this very anti-Muslim rhetoric. But now something different was happening. Now I witnessed the media drumming up a new set of wars right after 9/11. The war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. I watched this very same media that I had witnessed demonizing Palestinians now demonize Muslims altogether. And I just couldn't believe my eyes. I felt like the only person in my classroom that could really understand what this meant. And so I continued and stayed strong and became very passionate about becoming a journalist. But in the process, something very interesting happened. I started to think about my own faith, because as a Muslim and as an American and as a Palestinian, I too was being inundated day in and day out with the same images that all Americans were inundated with Muslims, that they are oppressive, that Islam teaches hate, that Islam is oppressive towards women. And so I took it upon myself to learn about my own faith. I didn't wear hijab at the time. My parents are, very passionate about being Palestinian and the Palestinian struggle. But Islam, we prayed 5 times a day, we fasted during Ramadan. But Islam really wasn't the center of our life. Being Palestinian was. And so I took it upon myself to understand Islam. And what I found was very interesting. The images that we were being fed every single day of the women wearing, covering their faces, being oppressed by the Taliban, the women in other countries that weren't able to drive in Saudi Arabia, or the images of the Muslim man who's aggressive, he's only, he's brown and he's violent and he's always very good and he hates women, he hates education and so forth. Those are the images that I too was being inundated with. And at a certain point, those images start to become even within our own conscious. And so, took it upon myself to understand and learn about my own faith. And in this process, I had learned about the role of Wahhabism and how it manipulated and controlled the narrative of what Muslims were abroad, and how that played a role in justifying the wars that we were perpetrating, our country, the United States, perpetrating overseas. And I was shocked. I never heard about Saudi Arabia funding extremism. What is even Wahhabism? I had never heard of these concepts before. I didn't even know if I was Sunni or Shia. I remember coming home from school when I was, I think 13 or 14 from my sociology class. Mom, are we Sunni or Shia? Well, I don't know, Habibti. I think we're Sunni. And prior to 9/11, there was no such thing as Sunni or Shia talk. There was no such thing, especially as a Palestinian and Sunni community. That never came up. But here I was being exposed to the very sectarian and divisive and hateful narrative that wasn't just about, portraying Muslims in a very negative light, but it also brought to my attention very important historical figures like Sayyidina Zainab. And, And Imam Hussein, and Sayyidina Fatima. Figures I had never even heard of growing up. Excuse me. I can't even tell you. Please excuse me, it's a very emotional thing to talk about, but these are figures that I had never heard of growing up. And all of a sudden, I was exposed to these figures on my own. And the stories that they represented just ran through my veins because I had thought, this is the true story of resistance and standing up to oppression and tyranny. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of Palestinians, Palestine has not been liberated, obviously. But a lot of Palestinians and Arabs in general, they are very stuck in old ways. And they are also influenced by these Wahhabi narratives of what Islam is. And I felt for the first time, I had seen this new image of Islam, this new perspective, this new narrative of resistance. And I was so mad. I was angry. Why didn't anybody tell me about Sayyidina Zainab and Imam Hussein and Fatima Zahra? Why? And I realized at that time that their story represents the true epitome of resistance and fighting oppression. And this to me really hit home because as a Palestinian, as somebody who had lived and witnessed apartheid and felt really helpless as a teenager, I wanted a way, a means to stand up for the voiceless. And it was through their stories that I decided to wear hijab at the time. It was through their stories that gave me strength to speak up for those who were oppressed on a completely different level. And having those stories inspire me every single day and give me strength is the reason why I continue to put myself out there in the midst of all of the media chaos. When I started MintPress, I was 24 years old. Everyone thought I was crazy. And I said, no, it's about time that we have a Muslim woman wearing hijab out there fighting in the resistance movement against oppression. Where are all the hijabis? Where are all the Muslim women? They're on Instagram posting. Hijab has become a symbol of fashion in our Western society, and don't get me wrong, I like to look nice, to be presentable, and so forth, just like most women do. But in general, women are using the hijab, and even Western society and culture has taken the hijab and has told us we can fit in as long as you do it in a sexualized, hypersexualized way. You can fit in and be like us, and we'll accept you as long as you do that. But when I went into journalism, that wasn't my MO. It was to speak up for those who are suffering from war. So when I started MintPress at 24 years old, and everybody thought I was crazy, in fact, people within my own community told me, you'll never succeed as a hijab, you'll never succeed. People within my own family, no one will ever take you seriously, Mnar, because you wear hijab. I didn't listen to them. Every time somebody told me no, I took that and made it more of my strength. And as I continued to work through MintPress, it started out as a blog. I turned it into a global and international media outlet with dozens of correspondents around the world covering some of the most important topics that we don't hear about within the media. We're not just going and covering stories to say this is what's happening right now. We are going to give context about who the special interests are that are driving these policies. Why and who are the groups that are pouring, as Ahmed said, millions millions upon millions of dollars into our Congress, into our Senate, into our government to fund these wars, to create havoc around the world. That's what we're doing. And in 2013, MintPress broke a very, very big story, and I'll wrap it up with this. When the 2013 Ghouta chemical weapons attack took place in Syria, we sent journalists there to see who had committed this chemical weapons attack in Syria. Because here in the US, the media was painting it as Bashar al-Assad was killing his own people, gassing his own people, and it was basically the same narrative that was being drummed up, that has been drummed up for a justification for every conflict that we see around the world. Evil dictator, killing his own people, we need to go in there and save people by bombing the hell out of this country, right? That's the same narrative that we were being fed. And US warships were already pointing at Syria, ready to go. But because of the reporting that we had done and committed in Ghouta, our journalists came back and said that, in fact, it was Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, who had detonated these chemical weapons and committed this massacre as a false flag to paint the Syrian government as the perpetrators of this chemical weapons attack. Had nothing to do with Sunnis, had nothing to do with Shias. We thought, wow, we wrote this huge story. Al-Qaeda, America's worst enemy, right? Committed 9/11. We're exposing them for committing this chemical weapons attack in Syria. While our reporting was celebrated for a good couple of weeks, next thing I knew, Mnar, became the center of a character assassination that continues until this day because of our reporting on Syria. Saying that I was pro-Assad, that I'm a Shia sympathizer, I'm funded by Iran. Every single character assassination and label that you can think of was being posted about me. And articles written about me and my family. She's related to this person who once studied in Iran 25 years ago. This person, this, that. It was like all these like tangling webs. I couldn't believe it. I was there trying to bring, me and my journalists, we're trying to bring a story to show how wars are created by lies. All wars are based on lies. Every single one of them, and that was one of them. But there I was on the front page of one of the top news websites in the world, top 10, BuzzFeed, my picture plastered next to Bashar al-Assad. Who is this sympathizer of the Assad government? And it was very devastating to experience that, but these kinds of smears continue on and on and on. At first it was, who is this Muslim woman? Then it was, who is this Palestinian woman? Now it's, who is this woman who wears the hijab and is defending the Syrian government, even though we weren't defending the Syrian government at all, we were just exposing these things. And so just to wrap up, I found myself intertwined in the very Shia marginalization that we're here to talk about today. When you're trying to do the right thing, when you're trying to expose the very lies that justify war crimes abroad, instead of being celebrated through the media, the very neoconservative think tanks that promote these wars, that are funded by weapons manufacturers like Raytheon, like in foreign governments like Saudi Arabia, these are the very people who are working endlessly online to demonize and label and marginalize our voices because we're speaking up for the truth. Thank you.